Greetings folks and welcome to the Electromaker Show. This is your roundup of all things maker and embedded and lovely at Embedded World here in Nuremberg in Germany. We haven't even gone inside yet. This is a weird way to do the introduction, but we're going to be seeing a lot of really interesting stuff over the next few days. There will be interviews on our YouTube channel separate to this show. I'm going to try and keep it so the content in the show is separate to that so you can see both of them. But yes, there's so much to see on the floor today. So with all of that said, let's just get on with it. Now, that intro, as I mentioned, was filmed before we actually went into the trade show. I'm doing this voiceover after the fact. The idea was that I would hopefully have enough time in between everything else to do some voiceover, either on site or back at the hotel, and cut a show together to maybe even put out during the trade show, or at least just as it ended. However, as you have maybe seen on our YouTube page or our social media or our blog, we were very, very busy. I don't know what the final number of interviews we did, but it may have been 16 or 17. So there really wasn't much time in between. However, there is some general B-roll from the show. As you can see here, this is just us walking through the show. This wasn't even intentional, by the way. I asked Rich to get some B-roll of something so I could chat about it. But yeah, him following me through the show was, he didn't realize he had the camera on, but it was just such a nice way of showing what it's like to walk through the trade show. It is a little overwhelming, but it is incredible. It really is massive. Nuremberg Messe has multiple rooms, all of which are large, and rooms 2, 2A, 3, 3A, 4, 4A, 5, and 6 were all completely full of people making things. Now, one of the things that I did get to actually have a hands-on look at, which we didn't feature in any of the interviews or anything, was the Silicon Labs DOOM demo. A while ago, we covered the fact that one of the people working at Silicon Labs had a personal project, which was to port DOOM to one of their microcontrollers, the X265 maybe. But what made it especially, well, special is that you could play Bluetooth multiplayer on it, and I was so excited to try it out, but unfortunately this was in the exact moment that we were also going to be interviewing them about the new Arduino Nano Matter board. And if you'd like to see that interview, it is, I'll link to it in the description of this video, obviously. It's on our blog. It's also on our YouTube page. It was a kind of basic demo showing it off, but just, yeah, I mean, we've seen Matter demos before, but seeing it with, an Arduino Nano, which is something that are going to get in the hands of a lot of makers who maybe haven't messed with slightly more complex embedded tool chains before. It's just super exciting. It was always going to be. But yeah, seeing it in action, it was a very similar demo to the demo we saw last year on the Silicon Labs stand. But again, the fact that it is an Arduino, it's going to put it into the hands of a lot more people. And of course, we did see Arduino as well. There's interviews from them, and I'm going to put later on in this video a little bit extra about that too. Now, to avoid repeating myself too much, if I do refer to things in the video here that we saw elsewhere, I will timestamp the links in the description of this video. So, for example, one of the things I found very interesting from a personal perspective was the Rust demo on Veecle, or a company who are have made a certified bridge between Rust language code and legacy C and C++ drivers for the automotive industry. And it bridges between a couple of other things as well. I think they said like MathLab or Simulink or something like that. And to me, that was super interesting because I've messed around with Rust on STM32s, on ESP32s, but they're just hobby projects, all of those things. It's not something that's really ready for wider use for multiple reasons, one of which is that you don't want to rewrite legacy code that you've been relying on for a very long time, that many people rely on. And Veecle saw this and have made that bridge. But rather than talk about it more now, I'll just say that Stefan from Veecle gave a really good description of that, and I will link that interview in the description of this video. Now, moving on to Raspberry Pi, who interestingly brought new products to Embedded World, but they hadn't announced them and they weren't really shouting about them. They were on display. But yes, they have a new screen, which we will move on to in just a moment, which is quite nice. They also had one of the NVMe hats to fit on the Raspberry Pi 5. They had one showing, actually connected to said screen. But before we move on to that, I want to show you a short video of their new AI camera and it working with a Raspberry Pi Zero 2W, I think. Hi, this is the Raspberry Pi booth at Embedded World 2024. It's very loud, there's a lot going on here, but we wanted to show you this. This is a Pi Zero attached specifically to an Edge AI camera module that we know that Raspberry Pi have been working on with Sony on for a while. Now, more information on the module itself and everything like that is going to end up in a blog post on the Electromaker website. You can find a link to that in our bio. But this is one of two things on the floor here at Embedded World that Raspberry Pi have brought, but not actually announced. This is something that, as far as we understand, understand, this isn't actually a finished thing that is, this isn't actually a released thing or even an announced thing, but it is definitely a finished thing, and there's a way that you can tell this, because if you look in this cupboard just here, it even has a box. This is something that will be going on sale at some point relatively soon. And this is going to be yet another accessory in a long line of accessories that work with various Raspberry Pi products. And I have a real soft spot for the Pi Zero. Small form factor Linux computer, capable of a surprising amount of powerful things. And with an Edge AI camera like this on board, as you're seeing on the screen, it's doing multiple person detection on low-powered Linux hardware, which is one of my favorite things in the world to do. I can't help but feel like I was maybe exaggerating slightly when I said that AI detection on low-powered Linux hardware is one of my very favorite things to do, but it was very cool to see. And it is, in a way, not much of a surprise that we saw that, because a while ago I reported on the fact that Sony was investing some money into Raspberry Pi in order to do something with the IMX500. I can't remember how much of that was just speculation at the time or whether it was confirmed. Either way, I was fairly sure some kind of Edge AI ready camera would be on the way because of this. I mean, the IMX500, as it says, the world's first intelligent vision sensor with an edge processing functionality. And what this means in practice is essentially this little chip in and of itself, this little sensor with onboard processing, can do your person detection or object detection on the edge there and then send that to your hardware. So obviously in the case of what we were just looking at, that would be the Raspberry Pi Zero 2W. Anyway, moving on to the Raspberry Pi screen that they had there. I talked about this in a separate video. There's also a blog post about it. I will link that under this timestamp. But the main thing I just want to impress is that the camera doesn't really do it justice as to how bright the screen looks. It's very legible. Bear in mind that this is smaller than any monitor that I own, but I had a bit of a fiddle around with the Raspberry Pi 5 that was plugged into it, and I actually immediately thought that while this would be the perfect monitor to have around for single-board computers and things like that, of course, if Raspberry Pi release a Pi 500, like the Pi 400, it's going to be probably sold as part of a bundle. I'd be very surprised if they're not selling screens, mice, and Raspberry Pi 500s, or screens, mice, Raspberry Pi keyboards, and Raspberry Pi 5s as a bundle as soon as this comes out. But yes, it is a 1920 by 1080 60 hertz monitor. Early reports on it said it was 30 hertz. This was a mistake literally on the accompanying information on the stand, which was there on the first day, and by the time we came to talk about it, it was gone. But yes, there was a couple of mistakes. I think it was originally reported as a touchscreen 30 hertz monitor. It's not. It's just a 60 hertz monitor, which isn't a touchscreen, but it does look good. It has built-in sound. It's USB-C powerable. And surprisingly enough, the most exciting thing for me is that it is lightweight. It has a kickstand, so it can stand alone, or it can be mounted, as you're seeing in the video I have here, or the video in the description. So it would be the perfect third monitor for my desktop setup, and a perfect monitor to take down from that setup when I want to play with single board computers. I already have lights, cameras, and two large monitors bolted to this desk, and one more might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, but a light monitor that will be very easy to mount, and I'm almost certain there'll be a lot of different mounting options as soon as it comes out. All the 3D printers out there will be working hard to mount it to everything. If it's competitively priced, I'll be very surprised if a lot of people don't grab one of those, because it was just, as you may expect from Raspberry Pi, a not incredibly exceptional top of the line, just a very good kind of midline product. And you can get cheap monitors everywhere these days, but again, just the weight and the ease of use kind of jumped out to me as like, oh yeah, okay, I might actually get one of these just for my own personal uses. If you would like to support the Electromaker show, you can of course do all the YouTube nonsense of liking this video, subscribing and ringing the notification bell, leaving a comment, all of that stuff. But a more concrete way to support us is by going to electromaker.io/shop and getting everything you need for your next hobby project. We have a bunch of great stock at the minute, including Raspberry Pi 5s, so if you are looking for something, that would really help us out. Anyway, back to the conference. I will very briefly mention here that the 3 demos we had at the Nordic stand were fantastic, and Nordic had a lot of demos on display. In fact, they had a Matter demo on display, which I think is the same demos we saw a year before, so if you'd like to see what that is, you can check out last year's footage from Embedded World. I'll try to remember to add a link to that here. We also spoke to Robin again, who also last year gave us a fantastic demonstration of how easy it is to train a model on the Thingy 53, but in his words, he said he felt it wasn't a great demonstration, just waggling a Thingy 53 around in the air to get some some training data. So this time it was a real-world example of predictive maintenance on a fan with the Thingy 53 attached to the side of a fan, where it can gather the correct operation of the fan and feed all of that into Edge Impulse and then generate a model which will tell immediately if there's something wrong with the fan. And in this case, they simulated something wrong with the fan by adding a weight to one of the blades. But the great thing about it, of course, is you're using regular data to train it. So you don't need to simulate breaking your machine in order to train a model to notice when it has broken, which is kind of what you want if you're strapping sensors to an incredibly expensive piece of industrial machinery. Robin also showed us about their power management IC. I talk a little bit more about that later in this section too. But essentially a single chip that allows you to do a bunch of different power management stuff. And interestingly, the development kit for it, the 5340 on the development kit is mostly just a bridge between the USB and the power management chip. It does a little more than that, and Robin explains that too in the interview. That's a long and detailed interview, but it felt like a really good one. We start with what is a power management IC and end with how this amazing GUI for the power management IC can output overlay files for your Zephyr project. I really enjoyed that interview. We also saw a streaming video project, which is an extension of one of their engineers, Torbjörn, I think his name is. I may be remembering that wrong. Who talked about how you can link video over Bluetooth. When Bluetooth 5 came out, they were doing video to show that you can actually send large data streams, and he's extended that to work with their Wi-Fi EK as well, their NRF 7002 Wi-Fi 6 IC. Which unfortunately on the floor of the conference center it couldn't work all that well because everybody is firing so many radio waves around in that conference that it's really difficult to see. But the demo is still definitely worth looking at, and it's a really interesting touch point for broadcasting simultaneous data over Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And he talks about how he's done it, how it could be done differently. It's just, again, another very interesting demo. Anyway, the main reason I wanted to talk about this section wasn't to talk about Nordic's other demos, it was to talk about a very specific thing that was interesting about the power management IC. So let's move on to that. Now, we did a few interviews with Nordic Semiconductor. They had a few interesting demos on display, and they also had a few new products, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But this is from their PMIC demo. This is just some B-roll. There's a great interview with Robin showing us how it all works, and this is their power management IC. But they had, as an example of how much space it can save, the ZSWatch, which is an open source smartwatch, and shows the difference between version 4 and version 5. And they saved so much PCB space in version 5 by using the PMIC, is that they could put a USB connector on it and a mic and a buzzer, and they could put more flash memory on the board as well. So I wanted to show that off. And interestingly, this also leads into a funding website, Things, which is based on a very similar idea to this. But first, the ZSWatch that was featured on the Nordic stand. So this project is an open hardware, open firmware, so fully open source project to create a smartwatch using the Zephyr RTOS and a collection of Nordic parts. And it is something that you can get yourself. The GitHub even goes into exactly how you can get this printed up by a fabrication plant like JLC PCB or Next PCB or whoever you use, and then get this sent out to you in order to start developing your own firmware for it. I highly recommend the presentation. I've watched the first minute or two of it, but I already know what I'm going to be watching later. I don't hide the fact that I'm a little bit Zephyr obsessed at the minute. I really would like to get my head around it. But this is really interesting just because every element of this is practical. This is how do you get a working smartwatch and the ins and outs of how you combine everything that you need. You need everything to work smoothly. You want it to work like a smartwatch, but also you have a huge amount of power management to think about as well. But the main reason I wanted to mention it is just because this is the very same PCB showed on the Nordic stand with the different versions and how much space they saved on it. And the GitHub itself is a great resource for learning about the project. I think I even may have mentioned this briefly in an earlier show, but I'm coming back to it. So, link in the description to that. But interestingly enough, I almost confused this watch with another watch, which is a Nordic Semiconductor-based smartwatch that is a pre-launch project on CrowdSupply right now. So the HealthyPi Move is a similar idea, but it's based very much on health sensing. So this is, once again, open hardware, open software project. And you can probably see why I got a little bit confused, because the PCBs for a watch are, of course, very similar, even though the finished product is somewhat different. But in short, this is an open hardware device that lets you track all your vital signs, ECG, PPG, SpO2, blood pressure, EDA, GSR, and heart rate variability, respiration rate, and even body temperature. And this is, once again, based on a Nordic chip. This is the 5340, which is still their flagship Bluetooth Low Energy chip. And if you'd like to find out more, there's a bunch of different names of the sensors used. This is something that really interests me. Both do, actually, for very similar reasons, which is I am interested in kind of health wrist-based devices, because I am a runner. I would really love to have something which is a bit more open than the running watch that I already have, because I would love to be able to take all of my data and, yes, get all of the nice metrics after the fact, but have a nice real-time way of just getting that data and pumping it out over Bluetooth Low Energy to perhaps pump into a Raspberry Pi that's in my running rucksack that has a synthesizer running on it, so I can make data sonification while I'm moving live. I mean, that's a crazy project I want to get up to one day. But this particular kind of development kit is perfect, because it has all of the sensors built in already, it has a battery built in, it has a screen for debugging, and you can strap it to your wrist and just head out of the door. Once you've spent an evening hacking new features into it, you get to test them. That's what I like about it. This is a pre-launch project. We will definitely come back to it when it goes live, and if you'd like to find out more about it, you can of course put your details in the box here, which subscribes you to just this project's updates. Although I would give a shout out right now to the Crowd Supply newsletter, just the general sign-up newsletter you can find on the main page, because it's just always interesting. There's new products that haven't launched yet, things that are just going into funding, and old favorites that are now back in stock. So, for example, crowd favorites, all of these ones, they always sell out, but when they come back into stock and they made a new batch, you will get a notification about that if you sign up to the general Crowd Supply newsletter. But yes, both of these are super interesting ideas, and we will come back to both of them. This is something that you can print yourself right now. As far as I know, there isn't a shop page for it or anything like that, but there is a link somewhere for kits. Yes, if you're interested in a kit or want to get notified when the missing parts available are resolved, put your mail here. There's a Google form which allows you to sign up for more information on this as well. Now, Nordic had a few extra things on their stand, so let's cover that before we move on. They had development kits for the two new NRF54 system-on-chips they've announced. That's the L15 and the H20. And we talked about the H20 when it was first announced, and it broadly is a big upgrade across the board. The NPM fuel gauge board is something we're also going to talk about in the near future. That is highly linked to the power management IC that we talked about. But yeah, I think the thing that I really want to chat about quickly is the Nordic Thingy 91X. And I will keep this very brief. The main difference is that it has a new cellular NRF 9151 system in package, which is the smaller version of the NRF 9160 in the original. And it also has a Wi-Fi 6 IC now. But let's very briefly look at the NRF 9151, as I didn't really talk about it all that much when it was initially released. And in short, the main difference between it and the NRF 9160, or the NRF 9161, which was its predecessor, I suppose, is that it is 20% smaller, and you can now use power class 5 at 20 decibel millivolts. I believe that is dBm. Yeah, decibel millivolts. Which is way out of my wheelhouse. I don't really understand exactly the difference between the power class radio stuff, but I do know that means you can broadcast on a different band using much less power, I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong. There's a great introductory video, actually, that Nordic put out that just shows that stuff, essentially, the difference in size and the power class 5 stuff. And just a nice little thing showing you can use the NRF Cloud, which is their cloud-based platform, or you can use your own one, of course, and all the different packages available for it. Now, on our YouTube channel and also on the blog, we have a few interviews with Arduino. They released a 4G M.2 keyed module along with a new board for the Portenta. And they were also talking about this PLC Starter Kit. And the demo was quite cool. There was a predictive maintenance demo happening to the left side of the laptop you're seeing on the screen right now. The Starter Kit itself is right there. It's an Opta and with two extra little boards that can plug into it to allow you to test it all. But it wasn't until after I'd spoke to Stefano about it in the interview. He may have mentioned it, but I didn't tag on to the fact that they have a really thorough online course for working with the PLC Starter Kit, and I'd like to talk about that briefly right now. So the PLC Starter Kit comprises an Opter and a couple of extra boards. In fact, there is an image down here that shows all of them together. And it is here. So the Opter is in the middle, and then on the side there's a switching board that allows you to simulate different on and off states of the machines, and a sensor board here as well. Now the thing itself, it ain't cheap. It's €353, but when you bear in mind that you will be hard pressed to find an industrial PLC to take home and learn with a course designed for it for less than this, I still think this is something that is relatively decent value. And the really unique thing about this is just that with Arduino, they have a reputation of having quite thorough online documentation for things, and this is the first time I can think of a company like Arduino teaching about industrial automation. Because the PLC, the Explore PLC course is completely free if you are logged in to your Arduino account. And it starts with an introduction to the software, which includes the IDE version 2, but they also have a specific PLC IDE. But it also talks about things like the history of PLCs and why they came into the world and what they are like now. So it starts with mentioning, for example, that General Motors came up with the PLC according to this. And then, of course, moves on to the Opter itself and talks about the various features of it. And how you can use the starter kit to get going with it. And honestly, I kind of feel like outside of your first Arduino kit or whatever it is, what your first development boards are, when you learn the basics of embedded hardware programming, if you wanted to get someone into the industry and you wanted them to learn in a way that was really effective, I can't think of a better way than to actually have an Opter and a way of simulating the input and output in front of you and learn how to program it that way. Because then you will have that experience of hands-on with it before you even do the rest of your formal education. I don't know, for me, I'm always very excited about things like this because I didn't study any of this. I'm not an engineer. I say that very often. I've learned everything by fiddling around with hardware boxes, and I feel like this would be a wonderful way for a young person to get into industrial automation for the first time. Arduino do a lot of good things. Obviously, we sing their praises quite a lot, but this is something very special, at least to me. So before we close out this special show from Embedded World, or at least about Embedded World, I'm recording this section back in Berlin, I wanted to quickly point out the fact that we barely scratched the surface of what is happening at Embedded World, and by the nature of what we do, we're sort of running from place to place. Some interviews are things that we planned ahead of time with companies, some interviews are just things that sort of happened naturally, but there is a massive amount of stuff that you can only really see by going to these trade shows. And there are companies who are huge who I'd never heard of before, or companies who are small who it's no surprise I haven't heard of them, but are doing super interesting stuff. And in fact, if you want two examples of that, I would say Duduk and Taktoon, both folks who we interviewed and have interviews on the blog about, are worth a look. And I would like to direct your attention to the blog, because everything I've talked about today, including a lot more stuff, is covered on the blog. We made blog posts and interviews about pretty much everything we talked about. I haven't even mentioned in the show that Blues have recently dropped two new note cards. One is a LoRa note card for working with the LoRa hub. The other is a satellite note card accessory. It's designed to work alongside a note card. They also have a really interesting thing that I will talk about soon, so I'll not cover it much now, but they have a cut down version of the note card, which is cheaper, that you have to provide your own power to. We'll talk about that later. But Duduk are very interesting. That's AI music evaluation that generates visuals. And Taktoon, I also mentioned, they have this marvelous little hardware box, and they had a robotic arm that was pulling a sweet apart, basically torturing a Coca-Cola bottle sweet, and you had all of this information up on the screen. And this is a no-code industrial automation box with a high level of sensitivity. This is all stuff that's worth looking at. Just before closing out, I wanted to briefly mention that we chatted with some of the folks from the Embeetle IDE when we were there. And we've had some previous experiences with the Embeetle IDE. It is an IDE designed specifically for working with MCUs. And in fact, you're even seeing in the video description here a sneak peek of one of the things they have up and running, which is this way of turning on all of the GPIOs and finding out what they can all do for various different chips, which is something that you'll be familiar with if you use the STM 64 cube IDE or whatever. I never get that right. The STM32 cube IDE 64. Mario World, I don't know. Anyway, they have that coming to it, and they also have started working with a company called ZHi, I think it's called, or ZHi, who are a company with a bunch of different development boards with a lot of RISC-V going on. And again, Embeetle are the only IDE I know of that are just plug in, play, and get going with RISC-V chips like the CH32V003 that we've talked about a lot. And now with this partnership with ZHi, they're going to have a lot of interesting stuff going on too. This was we basically just popped by to say hello because we've had previous with Embeetle and ended up having a really nice chat with them, so it's definitely worth having a quick look. Anyway, I could waffle on about how fun Embedded World was for hours, but instead I highly recommend going and checking out all of the things that we have here. I'd also like to point out that Robin Mitchell, who does the Electromaker Educator videos, was also at Embedded World doing a bunch of recording. There he is right here, is Robin. Doing a bunch of recording for Electro Pages, and I will leave a link to their podcast in the description of the video as well, because they do long-form interviews with people, which I'm sure the engineers among you might find quite interesting. But for now, that is it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. That was our show for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing Embedded World with us. And I hope you enjoyed seeing what it's like being on the trade floor here. It's somewhat difficult to actually really show everything because there's such a huge amount of stuff going on here. And as much as I do very much like being in my attic and being alone and making the show, it's always a hell of an experience to meet the people who are making all of this amazing tech. So I hope you enjoyed the show. I'll be back next week with a more regular Electromaker show. But for now, I hope you have a safe, fun, and creative week. And I'll chat to you soon.